I think Bournemouth's season, when you're trying to evaluate it, is one of the strangest in like Premier League history, isn't it? Because the way they started with Scott Parker and, being smashed 9-0 by Liverpool, and Scott Parker even admitting that his side he doesn't think was good enough for Premier League, is an incredible admission, first of all. But the way that's been turned around since Gary O'Neill took charge, and the way they've avoided relegation relatively comfortably in the end, makes you feel like it's actually a pretty successful season all round. So a real mixture of things to consider with Bournemouth, isn't it?
It's absolutely a successful season, because I think all three of us and the rest of the world just had Bournemouth going down straight away. We all thought, there's absolutely nothing in that squad to keep them up. Even their manager was saying that, like you said. So I don't think we were alone in our thoughts. So the fact that they've managed to secure another season in the Premier League and kind of secure the future of Gary O'Neill, they could kick on now. If you look at the quality of the teams that are coming up from the Championship, and then consider also the quality of the teams that finished below them but survived, I'm not sure I'd put Bournemouth in my bottom three for next season either, and that could be a really good building block for them. There's been some really key turning points in their season, but what a great spirit Bournemouth have shown, really.
Well, to bounce back from defeats like that, the 9-0 one to Liverpool, but then still come through, I think out of the 18 games that they've gone ahead in, they've won 11 of them. So when they are ahead, they do take advantage of it. Their biggest problem has been scoring goals, really. Once they score goals, they're okay, but actually finding the net's been difficult. But I think you can't really talk about scoring goals without talking about a player like Philip Billing. He's really come into his own this season for me. Has been one of the key attacking components of their game. And I think you said it on the podcast, you didn't expect this kind of level from him, because in their previous season in the Premier League, he wasn't amazing by any stretch of the imagination, was he? But he's really kicked on.
Yeah, and he wasn't alone in that. There were a few familiar faces in that Bournemouth squad that we probably knew were good Championship players but didn't expect to perform in the Premier League, and have really outshone. Like, I think Solanke's had a really key role in Bournemouth's survival this season. I think he led the line well, even if it's not the most prolific striker. I think that what he brings to Bournemouth's game has been incredibly valuable for him. Billing, like you say, is kicked onto a whole new level. They'll struggle to keep hold of him, if we're totally honest. And Jefferson Lerma's the same, and he's out of contract, isn't he? So it looks like he's going to move on. I think Palace are lining him up already. But the fact that these players have managed to outperform what we expected of their level is a credit to Gary O'Neill, his first managerial job at this sort of level, and he's put all that squad together, a squad that we are familiar with, and all said we're not good enough. And that's what he's got out of those players, not without the help of some of the additions to the squad as well. You think about the fact that Neto came in the summer and took the captain's armband and has been a phenomenal goalkeeper for them, really responsible for them holding on to those victories, like you mentioned. It's a massive season for Bournemouth. You mentioned those fixtures where they lost to Liverpool. That came off the back of losing to City and Arsenal. So they didn't start the season very favourably anyway. I think they lost 4-0 to City, 3-0 to Arsenal, and then 9-0 to Liverpool in a row. Slightly later on in the season, I think they lost 4-1 to City, then played Arsenal the next week, lost 3-2. So there is some progress. And then they beat Liverpool 1-0. That's such a good sign of a turnaround that Bournemouth have managed.
With Bournemouth, though, I think when you look at when Gary O'Neill took over, it felt like they were at an all-time low. And when they put a manager in that's got no experience whatsoever, I think even in interviews, Gary O'Neill himself has said, I didn't think I was ready for this level. I thought I'd start lower down in the leagues. And when you hear Gary O'Neill talk, he's a really humble guy. He's really nice, really likeable. But I think he's got a real streak to him. As a player, he did as well. I remember him being a pretty tough player. And I think he's a pretty tough manager as well. And I think the players have got respect for him. And I think that's really shows on the pitch. They are quite a disciplined team now. Yes, they get beat quite heavily sometimes, but he's instilled something in them that is noticeable. I feel like Bournemouth have got an identity again.
Yeah, absolutely. And the key thing for them will be maintaining that identity and building on it in the summer, because they're not a team of great wealth. They're not a team with unlimited resources. So they've got to be really smart with how they kick on now to avoid being in any sort of relegation picture again. I think the January business they did shows that they can be intelligent in the market, and they'll have to capitalise on that again, won't they?
Well, where do they go next season then? How do they consolidate? How do they strengthen? I mean, they finished, was it 15th in the end, which again is a strange indicator of how their season's gone, because it sounds at the start of the season they'd have absolutely snapped your hand off for that.
Yeah.
But it's been a roller coaster to get there. So how do they kind of consolidate that? Because realistically, can they expect to finish higher than 15th? Probably not. but they're going to need to bring in some reinforcements. Where do you think it's needed the most?
Well, I think if we're looking at their midfield as a potential area that they might lose players, they'll obviously have to strengthen there. And I think bringing in some more Premier League experience will be really key for them. A lot of the players that have got Premier League experience in that squad currently are players that were with Bournemouth the first time round and also felt the relegation. Yeah. So players like Adam Smith, for example, he's one of their more experienced players now. I think they need to identify the midfield as a key area where they need to be a bit more aggressive at times and kind of continue to push with the kind of game play. Like that stat that you give us about them holding on to leads, that's very wily, that's very clever and calculated. But if they lose Billing and Lerma, then they need to think about where they're going to regenerate that from, because otherwise it's a big struggle from them. I think holding on to Mateus Vigna as well, that they've had on loan from Roma, would be huge, because I think he's had a really good impact on them as well. So there are options there for Bournemouth. I'm just worried about what they do with that budget and how big that budget will be, because you can't see it being that far, no?
No. Well, again, I think they need a goal scorer of some description as well, because Solanke, for all his goals, isn't prolific by any means. They need a goal scorer that's going to break into double figures and with Premier League experience, and there aren't many of those around. But if they can find somebody who has been a proven goal scorer elsewhere and maybe make them something that can work in the Premier League, then if their scouting department can unearth that kind of gem, they could do okay, because they're just missing goals. Like you say, when they hold on to leads, they do really well. But when they go behind, their record is just as bad as that other record is good. They can't recover from going a goal down. I think that's where they need to strengthen next season. It's just that ability to pull out goals from nowhere.
And it's going to be really hard for a team like Bournemouth to recruit this season, because you think it's so easy to bring the players to the Premier League because of the money that floats around that league. But you've got 7 teams in Europe this season that will want to bring players in, and that doesn't include Spurs or Chelsea. So that's 9 teams that automatically kind of fall above the rest of them. You've got teams like Wolves, who, if they hold on to Lopetegui, you've got a really high-level manager who has contacts within the game that you imagine Gary O'Neill probably hasn't been able to develop yet. Teams like Everton, who will want to kind of reinforce to avoid being in the position they're in. The teams coming up that will have exciting projects. If you're Bournemouth, how do you sell Bournemouth to a player? That's going to be the challenge. We saw that with Zaniolo, for example, in January. They'd agreed a deal with Roma. They had the money for it, but attracting the player of that kind of level, that's what Bournemouth need to kind of cement themselves and kick on. Are they that attractive a proposition for someone with a very rookie manager and a squad that doesn't really have that many stars in it? I hate to say it, and Bournemouth fans probably hate hearing it from me, but the fact that they've been able to secure Premier League football again for next season, they've got to be absolutely ecstatic with that.